Of course, we were talking to Paul Lapalisse, former Bomber coach. Now, I don't want to pretend that I know Paul Lapalisse well, personally. We all feel we know him, those of us who paid so much attention to him when he was head coach of the Blue. We watched him on the sidelines like any other TV viewer. When the Bombers struggled, we listened to him chatting with Bob Irving and members of the CJOB sports team. Listened to him on Monday nights, faithfully, on the Coach's Show. So I thought I knew him, but what did I really know? I knew one dimension of Paul Lapalisse. Look, the Bombers were struggling more often than not, and so we watched a guy who cared deeply, who was frustrated deeply, at the end of his rope deeply, and then one day, his bosses, the Bombers, cut the rope out from under Paul, and he was gone. And he's resurfaced now on TV, does a very good job as an analyst. But yesterday on this show, he wasn't analyzing football. He was analyzing life and telling us about what really matters in life. And that's character. And that people of high character never stop fighting for themselves and for others. And who taught Paul Lapalisse that? Who was his teacher on this? A person less than half his age. David Leach turned out to be the teacher of that oh-so-valuable lesson. David Leach, the 23-year-old who died this week after having lived and died many times over, physically, mentally, emotionally. And David would have died biologically had it not been for his love of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now, look, I don't want to talk about the cruelty imposed on young people by spina bifida. I want to talk about the goodness imposed on people like Alex Brink and Terrence Edwards and Justin Goltz and, yes, Paul Lapalisse, who spent real time over the years with David Leach, keeping his spirits going and, yes, giving him a reason to live. David Leach's words. Even though most people will think about the story as one of strong football heroes helping the weak, physically disabled young man, the story's about what they gave him. That's how most people will tell it. That's not the real story here. If that's the story as you understand it, you are missing the real story. The real story is not about what the athletes gave him. It's about what he gave them and their coach. While they were giving him a reason to live, he was giving them a reason to believe in real wins. The real wins and real losses are not scored on a scoreboard at a football stadium. Real wins are when people help other people to deliver the best of themselves. And the best part of any human being, including an athlete, is not inside that throwing arm or the catching hand or the powerful running legs or the ability to tackle some guy who's moving on that gridiron like a speeding locomotive. The best part of any human being is the part called character. Character, where you tackle your demons, you tackle your insecurities, your anxieties, your deepest fears, and you wrestle them to the ground. Character, where you run for a touchdown every time you touch somebody in the deepest part of their soul, making them want to keep on breathing and doing and smiling and conquering their disappointments and their disabilities. David Leach's biological father never saw the son he sired. David Leach's mother saw him and did not like what she was looking at and abandoned him. David Leach's grandmother beat on him repeatedly. David Leach took a blade to himself and wanted to bleed right out and get out of the coffin on wheels that he felt he was riding around in. And that's how it felt for him, until a father figure like Paul Lapalisse refused to abandon him, engaged him, inspired him, and gave him brothers to help do the same, like Alex Brink and Justin Goltz and Terrence Edwards and other members of the mighty blue and gold, mighty where it matters. So why won't I forget the conversation with Paul LaPolice this week? Well, because until I had it, right here on the radio, the name Paul LaPolice in my brain represented, he's not going to like it when I say this, but he knows it's the truth, and he knows I'm not alone. Till I chatted with Paul yesterday about this great story. I thought of Paul LaPolice as a losing coach. David Leitch's life tells me Paul LaPolice is no loser. Not by a long shot. He's a winner where it matters. David Leitch gave Paul LaPolice and his athletes and this broadcaster far more than we could give him. He gave us a living definition of what it means to be alive and to stay alive for as long as you can and have a purpose in your life, reason to get up every morning. A life with no meaning is a coffin. David Leitch may have been confined to a wheelchair. His heart was not confined by it. His soul was not confined. His imagination was not confined. And his spirit was unleashed by the power of belief in something larger than himself. For him, that was the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now look, I know there are some people listening to this right now who want to confine their imaginations. They feel the Blue Bombers are just a sports club, and Paul LaPolice is just a coach and not a winning coach, and David Leitch knew different. And now we know none of the above is even close to the God's honest truth. The team is made up of real men. Some of them are of very high character. And whether they play for the team or not, whether they have more or fewer points on the scoreboard, David Leitch scored every day. He was able to be at practice or at the game. And the father figure who never abandoned him and never would, Paul LaPolice, scored with us yesterday. I know he scored with you in ways far more meaningful than any football game. The game of life is 10,000 times more precious than any one football game. And David Leitch found that out from Paul LaPolice. And Paul, discovered that inside David. Paul is much more than a coach, and David was much more than a kid beaten up by life in a wheelchair. So thanks again, Lapo, for coming on this show to teach us about the meaning of life. And thanks again, David, for teaching Paul what it means to be a human being. Rest in peace, David, knowing that the rest of us miss you and love you and will follow your path. We will never, ever stop fighting.